I've been trying to cancel you for years, Brent laughed, his teeth gleaming under the harsh office lights. The performance review form between us showed a sea of red marks and disappointingly low scores that contradicted everything my team had accomplished this quarter. You know what's fascinating? He continued, leaning back in his chair. No matter how many roadblocks I put in your way, you keep crawling back. It's almost admirable. The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. My department had just broken every sales record in company history. Our client retention was at an all-time high. Yet here I sat, being told I was underperforming. The board has concerns about your leadership abilities, Brent said, sliding the evaluation toward me. You struggle with collaboration. You don't embody our values. Each word dripped with manufactured concern, while his eyes sparkled with victory. I felt something crack inside me, not my spirit breaking, but the dam holding back 5 years of calculated patience. Does the board know about the Anderlin account? I asked quietly. Brent's smile flickered. What about it? Just curious if you told them who actually saved it after you abandoned the client during their crisis, or if they know whose strategy doubled their spending. That was a team effort, he snapped, color rising in his cheeks. Interesting. That's not what Tom Anderlin says. I reached for my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. He was quite specific in this letter to the CEO about whose ideas revolutionized their marketing approach. Would you like to see it? His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. I noticed a bead of sweat forming at his temple despite the chilly room. What is this? He whispered, the paper rattling in his grip. Just one piece of a much larger puzzle I've been assembling, I said, watching as he scanned the contents. For 5 years, you've been taking credit for my work, isolating me from the team and undermining my contributions. Did you really think I wouldn't keep receipts? Brent's face drained of color as he flipped through the pages. These are confidential client communications. How did you... Every client whose business I saved after you nearly tanked it. Every idea you stole and presented as your own. Every meeting you deliberately excluded me from. I leaned forward. And that's just the beginning. The paper crumpled in his grip. This is career suicide. You think anyone will believe you over me? I smiled for the first time since entering the room. I don't need them to believe me, Brent. The evidence speaks for itself. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. This meeting is over. I'll be speaking with legal about your unauthorized collection of company documents. Before you do that, I said, still seated, you might want to check your email. I believe the board just called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. We've both been summoned. His hand froze on the doorknob. What have you done? Nothing compared to what you've done to me for 5 years. The difference is, I can prove everything. Wait, don't scroll away yet. If you've ever dealt with a toxic boss or watched someone take credit for your hard work, you know exactly how this feels. Hit that like button if you're rooting for justice. Subscribe to hear how this revenge unfolds, and drop a comment about the worst boss you've ever had. Trust me, what happens next will make your jaw drop. My name is Tavia Wright, and until yesterday, I was the most invisible high performer at Radius Marketing. I'm 34, single, and until Brent Lancaster became my boss 5 years ago, I was on the fast track to becoming the youngest director in company history. People often describe me as quietly determined. I notice details others miss. I remember conversations verbatim, months after they happen. I can spot patterns in chaos. These traits made me exceptional at my job and ultimately gave me the tools to save my career from a man determined to destroy it. The war began during my 3rd year with the company. I developed a workflow system that would revolutionize how we handled multi-channel campaigns. When I presented it during our quarterly strategy session, the senior leadership team was visibly impressed. Questions flew. The CEO called it potentially transformative. Brent, newly promoted to department head, sat silently at the end of the table. I didn't recognize the danger in his tight smile. 3 days later, Brent called an all-hands meeting. I've been thinking about Tavia's presentation, he announced to the room. While the concept has potential, it needs significant refinement to be viable. He turned to the digital display and revealed what he called Brent's enhanced workflow system, my exact proposal with minor cosmetic changes, and his name splashed across every slide. Tavia had the seed of something interesting, he said, not meeting my eyes, but it needed my improvements to actually work within our infrastructure. I opened my mouth to object, but the words died in my throat as I watched my colleagues nodding along. By the end of his presentation, he'd effectively rewritten history. My breakthrough had become his brainchild that he'd generously developed from Tavia's rough concept. That afternoon, I confronted him in his office. "You stole my work," I said, hands trembling with rage. Brent looked up from his computer with mild surprise. "I improved your work, Tavia. There's a difference. Your version would have crashed against regulatory compliance issues. Mine won't. My version addressed compliance in Section 3. You just moved it to Section 2 and changed the header." He sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. "This attitude is exactly why you're not ready for advancement. Great leaders share credit and celebrate team wins. They don't count pennies of recognition." "This isn't about recognition. I'm concerned about your defensiveness," he interrupted. "It suggests a lack of maturity that could impact the team. Let's talk when you've had time to reflect on your priorities." I left his office feeling hollow. It was a masterful manipulation. He'd not only stolen my work, but made my legitimate objections seem petty and unprofessional. That was just the beginning. Over the next month, my meeting invitations began disappearing from my calendar. Server glitch. It would say after I missed critical discussions. Important emails arrived in my inbox hours after everyone else received them. Client information reached me last, making me appear unprepared during calls. When clients specifically praised my strategies, Brent would interject, "She's part of my mentorship program, still developing her skills, but coming along." I began documenting everything immediately. Each glitch, every stolen idea, all the subtle ways he undermined me. At first, it was just for my sanity, proof I wasn't imagining things. I didn't know then it would become my salvation. 6 months into Brent's campaign, my formerly warm relationships with colleagues had cooled to polite distance. I'd catch fragments of conversations that stopped when I approached. Team lunches happened without invitations extending my way. "I've noticed you're isolating yourself from the team," Brent observed during a one-on-one. "Leadership is concerned about your ability to collaborate effectively." The cruelty was in its subtlety. Nothing was overt enough to file a complaint about. Each incident could be explained away as a misunderstanding or technology failure. But the pattern was unmistakable to me. I was being systematically erased. My breaking point came during the Williams project. After working nights and weekends on a comprehensive strategy, I arrived at the presentation to find Brent already there, my slides open on his laptop. "Good news," he told the client cheerfully. "I've refined the approach we discussed last week. Let me walk you through the improvements." I stood frozen as he presented my work, word for word, as his own. When the client loved a particular element I designed, Brent nodded appreciatively. "That section came together nicely," he agreed, never glancing my way. That night, I drafted my resignation letter. I sat staring at it until 3 a.m., the cursor blinking at the end of my digital surrender. Something stopped me from sending it, not hope, but a simmering anger that deserved direction. What if I stopped trying to win a rigged game and instead gathered evidence to expose it? The next morning, I deleted the resignation letter and created a new document instead. At the top, I typed, "The Lancaster Project, documenting systematic sabotage." My approach changed that day. I began playing a longer game. Instead of confronting Brent directly, I began operating in the shadows of our organization. I created a system to track every project, every idea, and every interaction. Each morning I arrived an hour before anyone else and sent myself emails detailing my daily plans and ideas. At night, I documented what actually happened versus what should have happened. I installed a discrete recording app on my phone for meetings. While technically allowed in our single-party consent state, I kept this quiet. Not for anything nefarious, just to ensure I had verbatim records of instructions given and conversations had. The most brilliant ideas often emerge from desperation. Mine came 3 months into my documentation project, when I realized simply proving Brent's sabotage wouldn't be enough. I needed to prove my value in a way no one could deny or diminish. I developed what I called my twin strategy approach. For every client project, I created 2 versions. The official one that would go through Brent, and a shadow version, implemented through careful alliances with overlooked team members. I began identifying others who had been sidelined by Brent's favorites, talented people whose ideas were consistently ignored. Paige from analytics had been relegated to running basic reports despite having advanced modeling skills. Devin from creative was consistently assigned mundane production tasks, while his innovative concepts were handed to others to execute. Liam from client services had been labeled too aggressive after questioning one of Brent's decisions. They became my first recruits. "I'm working on something off the books," I told them during a lunch I arranged at a cafe 3 blocks from the office. a proof of concept that might change things around here. Their skepticism was palpable until I showed them my documentation and explained my plan. We continue doing our assigned work, I said, but we also form a shadow team. We identify struggling accounts and quietly implement superior strategies, documenting everything so the results speak for themselves. And then what? Paige asked. Brent takes credit again? Not this time, I promised. This time, we build in attribution triggers that can't be removed or renamed. Devin leaned forward. What kind of triggers? Digital watermarks in our designs that tie back to creator profiles, coded language in strategy documents that, when assembled, tell a story about authorship, client-facing materials with metadata trails. That sounds... Liam paused, searching for the right word. Elaborate? I suggested. I was going to say brilliant. He replied with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. Our shadow team began with the Morriston account, a mid-tier client, on the verge of leaving due to disappointing results. While Brent assigned a junior strategist to create a maintenance plan, essentially hospice care for a dying account, our team developed a comprehensive revitalization strategy after hours. We implemented it piecemeal through our respective official roles. Paige noticed an opportunity in the data and suggested a small targeting adjustment. Devin happened to create alternative creative options during standard testing. Liam took initiative by offering the client enhanced reporting. None of these actions required Brent's approval individually, but together they formed our comprehensive strategy. Within 6 weeks, the Morriston campaign performance increased by 37%. When the quarterly review came, Brent was genuinely puzzled by the turnaround. What changed with Morriston? He asked during the department meeting. Just some tactical optimizations. I replied neutrally. Nothing major. His eyes narrowed slightly, but with positive results on the board, he could hardly complain. Instead, he did what he always did. He positioned himself at the center of the success. This demonstrates how my guidance on continuous improvement principles is taking hold in the team, he told the senior leadership team later that week. I knew because Hayden from the strategy team texted me during the meeting. Our shadow team grew. Zoe from media buying joined after Brent dismissed her innovative channel strategy. Then came Riley from production, Emmett from market research, and Jesse from digital, all talented individuals who had experienced Brent's particular brand of managerial vampirism. We called ourselves the Invisibles, a name that began as self-deprecating humor but evolved into something like pride. We met weekly at different locations outside the office, each bringing accounts that needed rescue and ideas that deserved implementation. As our network expanded, so did our impact. The Invisibles touch transformed struggling accounts into success stories. Clients who had been considering leaving became vocal advocates. Performance metrics in our influenced campaigns consistently outpaced others. The pattern became noticeable to everyone except Brent, who remained oblivious to the underground revolution happening within his department. His focus stayed fixed on taking credit for wins and assigning blame for losses. During my second annual review under his leadership, Brent gave me another below expectations rating, despite my accounts showing the highest growth percentages in the department. Your individual performance metrics are acceptable, he acknowledged with faint praise, but leadership requires more than numbers. It requires influence, which you seem to lack. Nobody in the department looks to you for guidance. I nodded solemnly, thinking of the 15 people who now attended our weekly Invisibles meetings. You're not a team player, he continued. You work in isolation. I thought of the collaborative workflow system our shadow team had developed, now managing projects across 3 departments. And most concerning, you lack innovation, he concluded. When was the last time you brought a truly new idea to the table? I bit back a smile, thinking of the attribution triggers embedded in the quarterly report sitting on the CEO's desk at that very moment. You're right, I said. I'll work on those areas. Brent seemed almost disappointed by my acquiescence. He'd come to enjoy our confrontations, the opportunities they provided to remind me of my place. My new strategy of apparent submission confused him. Our shadow network's influence continued growing. We developed systems to share knowledge, distribute workload, and implement changes without drawing attention. The results were undeniable, though the source remained invisible to upper management. The breaking point came with the Anderlin account, our largest client and Brent's personal point of pride. Tom Anderlin, the marketing director, had been working exclusively with Brent for years. Their quarterly golf games and occasional vacation overlaps were common knowledge. When Tom called in a panic one Tuesday morning about a sudden competitor threat requiring an immediate strategy pivot, Brent was unreachable on the second day of a ski trip. The account team forwarded the emergency call to me as the next senior person available. "Tom, I understand the urgency," I said after listening to his situation. "I can have a response plan to you by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" he balked. "The board meets at 9 a.m. to decide whether to shift budget to counter this threat. I need options today." I glanced at the clock. 10:37 a.m. "I'll have preliminary recommendations by 4 p.m., I promised, already mentally assembling my Invisibles team. Within 30 minutes, I had our core group huddled in a small conference room. By noon, we had analyzed the competitor threat and developed 3 potential response strategies. By 2 p.m., we'd refined these into a comprehensive counter-approach that leveraged insights from 5 different departments. At 3:58 p.m., I sent the strategy document to Tom. He called me immediately. "This is exactly what I needed. How did you pull this together so quickly?" "I work with an exceptional team," I replied truthfully. "Brent never mentioned you as a strategic lead," Tom said, confusion evident in his voice. "I'm relatively new to strategy development," I lied smoothly. "Still learning." The next morning, Tom called again. "The board approved your approach unanimously. They want a fast-track implementation. Can you lead the kickoff call today?" By the time Brent returned 2 days later, the Anderlin counter strategy was already in motion. Tom had sent an effusive email to our CEO praising the remarkable strategic agility of the team. Brent came directly to my desk, his face tight with something between anger and fear. "What happened with Anderlin?" he demanded. I explained the situation clinically, emphasizing that I'd simply responded to an urgent client need in his absence. "You should have consulted me first," he snapped. "I know that account better than anyone. I tried calling you twice," I reminded him. "The client needed immediate action. Send me everything you've done. I'll review it and make necessary corrections before more damage is done." Later that afternoon, Brent called an emergency meeting with the Anderlin team. I watched as he attempted to reshape the narrative, positioning the strategy as something he had been developing before his trip and had asked Tavia to formalize in his absence. The problem came when Tom Anderlin unexpectedly joined the call for the last segment. "Brent, good to have you back," Tom said cheerfully. "I've already shared Tavia's strategy with our entire marketing team. They were impressed with the fresh approach, quite different from our usual playbook with you." Brent's smile faltered. "Well, as I was just explaining, the core concepts were part of ongoing work I've been directing." "Really?" Tom sounded genuinely surprised. "When we spoke last week, you recommended continuing our existing approach despite my concerns about the competitor movement." An uncomfortable silence fell across the video call. "Perhaps I misunderstood," Tom continued. "Regardless, we're moving forward with the strategy as Tavia presented it. In fact, our CEO was so impressed that he's requested she join our quarterly planning session next month." I watched Brent's face on the video screen as he realized he'd lost control of his premier client relationship. Something dark passed behind his eyes, a look I'd seen before, but never so nakedly displayed. That evening, as I prepared to leave, Brent appeared at my desk. "Impressive work with Anderlin," he said, his voice unnaturally pleasant. "We should discuss your career aspirations soon. Perhaps there's a growth opportunity we've been overlooking." The sudden shift was jarring, from years of undermining to apparent mentorship in the span of hours. But I'd documented too much, seen too much, to believe this represented genuine change. "That would be great," I replied with matched insincerity. As he walked away, I noticed him glance back with calculation in his eyes. I recognized that look. He wasn't offering advancement. He was plotting containment. I had become a threat that needed managing. What Brent didn't realize was how far beyond containment we had already gone. The Invisibles now numbered 23 people across every department. Our shadow strategies were driving results throughout the company, and the attribution triggers we'd embedded in our work were creating a data trail that led directly to the actual creators of value. The following week, the CEO's executive assistant contacted me directly. "Marian would like to meet with you tomorrow morning," she said. "She has some questions about recent performance patterns the data team has identified." When I arrived at the CEO's office the next day, I found not just Marian waiting, but the entire executive leadership team. On the conference table lay printed copies of performance analytics for every major account over the past 18 months. "Tavia," Marian began, "we've noticed some interesting patterns we hoped you might help us understand." I sat across from Marian, fighting to keep my expression neutral. Behind her composed demeanor, I sensed something significant was unfolding. The other executives, finance, operations, client services, and human resources, watched me with curious intensity. Of course, I replied. How can I help? Marian gestured to the performance charts. Our analytics team identified something unusual. When we mapped account performance against strategy implementation, we found two distinct patterns. She turned a page to show color-coded graphs. Accounts following what we've been calling standard protocols show modest growth averaging 12% annually. But accounts using these alternative approaches, she pointed to a separate set of bars soaring above the others, consistently outperform by margins of 40 to 65%. The room fell silent as I processed what I was seeing. The Invisible's work, quantified and contrasted against Brent's approved strategies, laid bare for leadership to examine. What's most interesting, continued Marian, is that we can't determine where these superior strategies originated. They don't follow our standard approval workflows. The HR director leaned forward. When we tried tracing authorship through our systems, we found unusual patterns, embedded client codes, distinctive language structures, even metadata signatures that don't match our templated processes. My heart raced. Our attribution triggers had worked. They'd noticed the patterns without immediately identifying the source. Can you explain these anomalies, Tavia? Marian asked. This was the moment I'd both dreaded and anticipated for years. The complete truth would implicate not just me, but everyone in the Invisibles. A partial explanation might protect others, but would dilute the impact of everything we documented. I believe I can, I said carefully, but I need to understand what you're looking for. An explanation of methodology or accountability? Marian's eyebrow raised slightly. Both, I think. I took a deep breath. For nearly 2 years, I've been implementing alternative strategies outside the approved channels. The finance director frowned. You've been operating unauthorized client initiatives? No, I clarified. I've been doing my assigned work as directed, but where I identified opportunities for improvement, I also developed enhanced approaches that could be implemented within existing scopes of work. Without approval? The operations director looked troubled. I attempted to propose improvements through proper channels initially, I explained. I have documentation of 27 strategy recommendations submitted to departmental leadership over a 3-year period. None received approval for implementation. I pulled out my tablet and opened a folder containing every rejected proposal, along with subsequent communications showing how elements of those same ideas later appeared in Brent's presentations. Yet these same concepts, when implemented discreetly within approved activities, produced the performance improvements you've identified. Marian studied me with new intensity. Why work outside the system, Tavia? Why not escalate if your ideas were being suppressed? I tried, I admitted. Twice. I requested meetings with directors to discuss innovative approaches. Both times, the meetings were canceled after Brent spoke with them. I have the email chains. I showed them the correspondence, my meeting requests, the initial positive responses, followed by polite rejections after Brent's intervention. Eventually, I realized I needed indisputable evidence that my strategies worked, not claims or proposals, but actual results that spoke for themselves. The executives exchanged glances. Marian tapped her pen thoughtfully against the table. These attribution markers you embedded, was that part of building your case? I nodded. Each implementation included identifiers that couldn't be removed or repurposed without breaking functionality. They create a clear record of origin. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Finally, Marian closed her folder. Thank you for your candor, Tavia. We'll need time to discuss this internally. Please keep this conversation confidential for now. I left the meeting uncertain whether I'd just saved my career or ended it. While I had documentation supporting everything I'd said, I'd still admitted to working outside approved processes, something many organizations would consider grounds for termination. The next morning, Brent called me into his office, his manner unnervingly pleasant. Great news, he announced. I've recommended you for a special project in our Singapore office, 3 months helping them implement our workflow systems. It's a tremendous growth opportunity. The trap was transparent. Get me out of the building while he dismantled whatever evidence I'd presented to leadership. That's quite an opportunity, I replied, matching his false enthusiasm. When would this start? Immediately. The paperwork's being processed today. You'd fly out Monday. 3 days. Just enough time to pack. Not enough to organize my documentation or brief The Invisibles. I'm flattered by your recommendation, I said. Let me check some personal commitments and get back to you this afternoon. His smile tightened. The regional director needs confirmation today. It's a competitive placement. I understand. I'll have an answer by 3. As I turned to leave, he added, Leadership mentioned you had an interesting meeting yesterday. Anything I should know about? Just some questions about performance analytics, I said vaguely. Nothing substantial. His eyes narrowed slightly. Tavia, I hope you understand that any unauthorized work could potentially violate client contracts. That would have serious implications. The threat hung between us. Step out of line and face not just termination, but potential legal action. I simply nodded and left his office, my mind racing. Within minutes, I'd sent an emergency signal to the Invisibles, a calendar invitation for Project Archive review in the small conference room at lunch. When we gathered, I explained the situation. They're either investigating Brent's leadership or preparing to terminate me for working outside approved channels, I told the group. Either way, Brent's trying to ship me to Singapore immediately. That's exile, Paige said, horrified. Once you're overseas, he'll dismantle everything we've built. Not if we accelerate our timeline, I countered. We plan to present our complete findings next quarter, but we need to move now. For the next 3 hours, the Invisibles activated our contingency plan. Each member had maintained their own documentation trail, independent but interconnected with mine. By mid-afternoon, we had compiled everything into our shared secure folder, accessible only to members with multi-factor authentication. At exactly 2:55 p.m., I returned to Brent's office. I've considered the Singapore opportunity, I told him. Unfortunately, I can't accept it at this time. His pleasant facade cracked. This isn't really optional, Tavia. Leadership feels your skills would be valuable there. Interesting. That conflicts with what Marian told me this morning. I was bluffing. I hadn't spoken with Marian since our meeting. But Brent's reaction confirmed my suspicions. His face paled slightly. You spoke with the CEO? About what? About my future with the company. She suggested I stay exactly where I am for now. Before he could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at it, then back at me. We'll continue this discussion later, he said, reaching for the phone. I left, closing his door behind me, and immediately texted Emmett from Market Research. Phase 2 initiated. The following morning, I arrived to find my access badge deactivated. Security called Brent, who came to the lobby with poorly concealed satisfaction. There seems to be an IT issue with your credentials, he explained loudly enough for nearby employees to hear. While it's being resolved, HR has suggested you take a paid administrative leave. Is there a reason for this sudden leave? I asked, equally publicly. Just routine during certain types of internal reviews, he replied smoothly. Nothing to worry about if everything's in order. He escorted me to my desk to collect personal items, watching closely as I gathered my things. What he didn't know was that I needed nothing from my computer. Everything important had been secured externally long ago. I'll need your laptop as well, he said. It needs to verify some usage logs. I handed it over without concern. Of course. Anything else? We'll be in touch soon, he said, his confidence restored now that he believed he'd contained me. As I left the building, I received a message from Riley. Execution completed. Countdown active. I spent the weekend in limbo, waiting for either termination papers or vindication. The Invisibles kept me updated through our secure channel. Brent had called emergency meetings with several team members, fishing for information about our network. He'd ordered IT to audit all my digital activities and assigned one of his loyalists to review all my client interactions. Monday morning, my phone rang. Marian's assistant, asking me to come to the office at 10 a.m. for a meeting. No details provided. When I arrived, security issued me a temporary badge with limited access. I was escorted not to Marian's office, but to the largest conference room. As the door opened, I saw not only the executive team, but also the full board of directors seated around the table. And there was Brent, his expression cycling between confusion and barely contained rage. Tavia, thank you for joining us, Marian said. Please, have a seat. I took the only empty chair directly across from Brent. Marian addressed the room. Following our preliminary review last week, we expanded our investigation into the performance anomalies identified by analytics. What we found necessitated this emergency session. She nodded to her assistant, who distributed folders to everyone present. For the past 5 years, our company has experienced 2 parallel realities, Marian continued. The official one, documented through our standard processes, and an unofficial one that has actually driven most of our growth. She opened her folder. This report quantifies the impact of both approaches across every metric that matters: client retention, revenue growth, team satisfaction, and innovation implementation. The differences are stark. The board members flipped through their copies, expressions growing more serious with each page. Most disturbing, Marian continued, is evidence of systematic suppression of talent and ideas, particularly from women and minorities within the organization. We found documented cases of idea theft, deliberate exclusion from critical meetings, manipulated performance reviews, and strategic isolation of high performers. Brent shifted uncomfortably. If I may. Not yet, Marian cut him off. We've also discovered something extraordinary: a network of employees who found ways to create value despite these obstacles. They call themselves the Invisibles, and they've been responsible for saving our largest accounts and driving our most significant innovations for years, all while receiving poor performance ratings and being passed over for advancement. She turned to me. Tavia, as the board requested, would you walk us through how this parallel system operated? For the next 30 minutes, I outlined how the Invisibles had formed, documented our work, and created attribution systems that couldn't be manipulated. I explained how we'd developed a method to implement superior strategies within approved workflows, allowing for direct performance comparison. Throughout my presentation, Brent's expression darkened. When I finished, he leaned forward. This is a manufactured narrative, he insisted. Tavia has manipulated data and worked outside approved channels, violating company policy and potentially client contracts. She's coordinated insubordination across departments. These are terminable offenses, possibly even legal matters. The room fell silent. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Brent was skilled at reshaping narratives, and his confidence was unwavering. Then Devin from Creative opened the door, followed by Paige, Liam, Zoe, and 15 other members of the Invisibles. You requested the full team for this portion, Marian? Devin asked. Marian nodded. Yes, please come in. As the Invisibles filed in, taking positions around the perimeter of the room, I watched Brent's confidence crumble. These weren't just junior employees he could dismiss. These were respected professionals from every level and department. Each of you has reviewed the report and provided input, Marian said to the group. Is there anything missing or misrepresented in the findings? One by one, the Invisibles offered additional context, specific examples, and personal testimonies. With each new voice, Brent seemed to physically shrink. When they finished, Marian turned to him. Brent, you've heard the evidence. What do you have to say? He straightened his tie, attempting to regain composure. This is clearly a coordinated attempt to undermine my leadership by people who resisted necessary change. I made difficult decisions to maintain standards and ensure accountability. If some felt that process was unfair, there were proper channels to address those concerns. Like the channels Tavia used to submit 27 improvement proposals that you rejected, then later implemented under your own name? Asked the head of operations. Or the proper channels used by 12 employees who requested transfers from your department, all of whom reported retaliatory behavior afterward, added the HR director. Brent's composure slipped further. This is absurd. I've consistently delivered results. Have you? Marian interrupted, pointing to the performance charts. Because our analysis shows your approved strategies underperformed against every benchmark, while the work you actively suppressed drove all our significant growth. She closed her folder with finality. The board has reviewed these findings and reached a unanimous decision. Effective immediately, we're restructuring the entire organization around demonstrated performance rather than hierarchical position. She turned to me. Tavia, we'd like you to lead the transformation team, working directly with the board to implement the collaborative systems your group has already proven effective. The shock must have shown on my face. This went beyond vindication. They were putting me in position to reshape the entire company. Brent stood abruptly. This is outrageous. I've given everything to this company for 11 years. And taken much that wasn't yours, replied Marian calmly. Human Resources will discuss transition options with you after this meeting. As Brent stormed out, the room fell momentarily silent before erupting in congratulations and relief. Board members approached to introduce themselves, executives offered support, and the Invisibles exchanged looks of vindication. Later, as the room cleared, Marian pulled me aside. You could have left, she said. Many would have, after experiencing what you did. I considered it, I admitted. Why stay and fight this battle? I thought about it for a moment. Because places only change when people care enough to fix them instead of flee them. And because I refuse to let someone else's insecurity determine my worth. She nodded thoughtfully. Well, I'm glad you stayed. We have a lot of work ahead, and a lot of invisible talent to make visible again. As I left the building that evening, I checked my phone to find dozens of messages from Invisible's members. Not just celebration, but ideas for the transformation ahead, already thinking beyond vindication to actual change. I smiled as I texted back, "The real work starts tomorrow. No more invisibility." If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. So many of us have faced workplace injustice or watched talented people get pushed aside, while others take credit for their work. Share your experience in the comments. How did you handle a similar situation? Did you fight back or walk away? Hit subscribe if you want more stories about standing up to workplace bullies and reclaiming your power. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead by proving your worth so loudly it can't be ignored.